but you know what? It's never ending. We always have this push and pulls. And the
Yeah.
person who reminded me of this is Ta-Nehisi Coates. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bad Natives podcast. I am Adesua out of Abuja.
And out of Nairobi, I'm Charles Onyango Obo.
And in Kampala, Robert Kapshenga, the bad native.
The OG Bad Native. bad,
Yeah,
bad from the day you were born.
straight out.
Bob,
At this
I
now let me
saw
say
you are being washed out
where?
again in Kampala.
Yes, you know, at this where you really need to come and visit. Kampala is, or Kampala as it's supposed to be called, is one of those locations where nature shaped it
Mm,
in a particular manner. So it's not a hilly place by accident. It's hilly because it is a rainy area and water is supposed to drain into Lake Victoria.
mm,
And it has a natural filtration system. So, what have we human beings done? We've gone and built in all the areas that the water is supposed to pass. We have a lot of built up space now in concrete, delivering large amounts of water through locations that are blocked.
mm.
We have a water, I think the Romans called them aqueducts, a delivery system that was meant for, built by the colonial administration for 100,000 people. The city now, during the day, has 6 million Ugandans.
Mm.
And we've built all these high rises, blocked every conceivable area. So now, when as Ugandans say, small rain, 20 minutes, crocodile situation. People are flooding, trucks can't move, guys with little cars are praying to their gods. So it's
That's
it's
yeah, that's the same problem we have in Lagos. People have built these ultra luxury estates on the canals, on the drainage ways. And so now we're going to a process where you see a lot of demolition, and then people are pushing back that, oh, the person who gave them the permit was corrupt. So why aren't they going after the corrupt person? But it's a very significant situation that you see. You get 20 minutes of rain, you get flash flooding, you see the most insane of images coming out of Lagos. But yeah, I would need to come to Kampala. Ambassador Adonia invited me
Yeah.
to come.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
Come,
where is the interview?
come.
sent it to the
Actually,
group. We need
Okay.
to post this on our
ask him.
socials.
No,
Yeah.
you tell him to
Mm.
get you an interview with the president.
Really?
He can, yeah.
I,
We're both telling you he can. He
I will
can.
ask him. He
And
said I should
Now,
come in end of the month.
yes,
now, Adesua, on a slightly more somber note, you are professionally bereaved. I mean, you had this horrific murder of your colleague during a robbery. May her soul
Mm.
rest in peace. She has
And
a very difficult name to pronounce. I pronounce the easy one, Somi, which is, I think, short for Somtochukwu, I think.
yes, you
Maduagwu. Just, it's a tragic thing. Speak to us about that. What happened?
Somtochukwu Maduagwu. You actually pronounced it very well. Her name was Somi. We worked together here in Arise's Abuja office. She was 29. She would have turned 30 on the 26th of December this year. And she lived not very far from where I am right now in Kantampe. And you had a horde of armed robbers attack her building. They actually also killed the security guard. He was shot and he died as well. And they said there were about 15 to 16 armed robbers come to this building of apartments with about 14 apartments and start attacking them, breaking down their doors and robbing the apartments one by one. It's very unclear at this moment if Somto was pushed or if she jumped, but she was on a third floor apartment and she was discovered by her neighbors partly dressed on the floor of their building, and it looked as though she had come down from her apartment. Some people think she could have jumped out of fear. Some people think she could have been pushed or forced over. Um, it's it's something that I don't want to really speculate about. What we
Yeah,
do know
yeah.
is that there was an armed attack on her building and she has died. And it's been very painful. Um, she's the second woman that I have met since I moved to Abuja who has been killed. The other woman was Eritrean. I met her, we're going to the same restaurant to have pasta in the evenings. We have friends in common. And she was killed actually on a road 2 streets down from where I am right now. Hers appeared to be someone she knew, um, but she was assaulted and killed. And it's something that when we talk about the sanctity of lives in Nigeria and the idea that someone who came back to Nigeria, because both of them came to Nigeria to work in Nigeria. Somto came from England, and this Eritrean lady also came from abroad. And you see young women, young Nigerians coming to the country to try and build, try and make something out of themselves, try and better the country, and you see their lives get cut short. And then what I have seen with Somto's death, which has depressed me more, is that you see people make it into this political show of remorse, but there is nothing done about it. There's no belief that something will change, that who's going to be held accountable. The police were very close. This Kantampe is a very nice area. You have senators and ex-senators living in Kantampe. Is not a cheap area, right? The police were close. Why didn't they come on time? They said they didn't have petrol or fuel in their car. There was a delay to take Somto to the hospital as well as the security guard. There's been allegations that the hospital didn't want to treat them until they saw ID. We have a huge issue with hospitals also treating gunshot victims. She wasn't
Mm-hmm.
shot, but the security guard was. But that hospitals regularly reject victims. Another person who died is a tech founder, a very impressive tech founder, died in Lagos. He was hit when he was on a motorcycle. This happened also this year. And when he was taken to the hospital, he was rejected by multiple hospitals. It was later found out that he had very expensive health insurance that would have even covered his bills, but the hospitals rejected him. We've seen pregnant women die because hospitals are rejecting them. So when we talk
Why,
about these,
why, why, why are they rejecting? Why are the hospitals?
there's two things. First, they say that they don't want to treat criminals, that police will come and harass them if they've treated criminals. The second thing is they say they don't want to be owed money, that if they take in emergencies, they'll be owed money. So we see what when structural failure results in death, because it's not just individual tragedies, it's a structural issue. We can't have people being rejected by hospitals. It's I, so for me, like, it's a thing about crime. It's a thing about lack of security response, but it's also about our health system and structural failure in our health system. I think it really highlights a lot of the issues that we are facing right now in Nigeria.
Oh, that is really terrible. Just
But I have a
wow.
question for Adesua, Charles. I have a question. What is driving the crime, the nature of this crime, violent crime in Nigeria? And I don't mean to insult you, but really, the only crime that we know Nigerians for is fraud. We don't know. Nigeria has not had a reputation for violent crime like South Africa.
Oh, Bob. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This
kidnappings
is
and the and the
no,
bombings.
but even in Nigeria, no, but that's almost like recent Boko Haram. They haven't had the type where even the kidnappings, it was a financial transaction. It was never. acts of violence, but that's why I want to ask now. It seems to take on a new character. What is this? What is driving this?
I think there are very many drivers of this. We had an era where there was a lot of armed robbery in Nigeria. This is back in the day. You'd see it in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Benin. There was a lot of armed robbery, but this was a very long time ago. We're talking 20 years ago. It was a
Yeah.
type of crime we thought we had killed, particularly in the cities. But you see, what we have allowed to fester is what I call the kidnapping industrial complex, the banditry industrial complex. We have created an economy out of kidnappings. And
Wow.
a lot of times they were happening outside the major cities. So everyone, the politicians or the political elite or the elite felt exempt. It felt like this is happening where there's terrorism or this is happening in the villages. It's not happening in the cities. But we
Mm.
have now started seeing it happen in the cities where people are getting kidnapped, particularly in Abuja. And Abuja is very porous, it's in the north. It's
Mm,
very close to, and you get a lot of people who have been internally displaced coming down to Abuja. A lot of people who are fleeing from the banditry and the Boko Harams coming into Abuja. You also have a lot of drug use amongst the youth. I think it's a huge crisis we're not talking about. We talk about the unemployment crisis, the drug crisis, and displaced people coming down into the cities. It is a recipe for crime. And it is actually a recipe for violent crime. And people feel, and even I feel sometimes when you're in your estates and in your gated compounds, it just feels so far away. And then you're
mhm.
seeing instances happen more and more in what is nice areas. What I have seen recently, at least, at first we were having what they call express kidnappings, which I honestly think the criminals learned from the police. They take you, they take you to an ATM, they empty your account.
Right.
The first time I heard of this, it was policemen who did this to my friends.
Wow.
The first time I heard of this, it was a police that did this to my friends. The second time, the third time I heard of this, it's guys just going on a morning jog or, going on a morning run, and someone pulls up on them, takes them, takes them to an ATM. Then you started seeing different versions. They start telling them to call people they know. Don't tell them you've been kidnapped. Tell them you need to borrow money or you need to send money to this account. But we've now gone from express kidnappings to actual, violent crime. And for me, it just is a normal trajectory. Like it's just like if you don't, it's like if you put rice on the fire and you
Mm,
leave it on low heat, it will
mm,
still burn. It will burn one day. Like
mm,
it's just going to burn one day. You cannot, if you don't add water to the rice, if you don't put off the stove, if you don't do anything, it will burn. It has to get worse if you're not treating the root causes, if you're just watching it. I think a lot of times in Nigeria, we just see people watch things and until they get to a place that it's just untenable. And then everyone acts surprised as to how did this happen. This is a natural this is a natural conclusion of the journey that we have been on.
mm.
So I think like it it's very frustrating as a young person or as a citizen or as anybody who pays attention because you're just like this is where we are going.
Charles, I want to comment overall on how what I see as societies that degenerate into that kind of crime. I think that there is always a dismantling of the security apparatus or a poor handling of the transition of people with violent skills. So what ends up happening? I mean, like in South Africa, one of the things that drove the violent crime was the failure to integrate the people who had been in the armed struggle. The
Interesting.
elites, the political elites were integrated, but the fighting boys, the MK boys, who the only skill they had was violence, and had no qualification were not put in the army, they were not put in the police, they were not given anything. Now, what I didn't know, by the way, Charles, the Desua, was that ANC used to run, when they were in exile, they used to run a clandestine drug smuggling operation into South Africa to sell methamphetamines. And so the boys, to raise money, so the boys who used to do those runs, they were abandoned. So, but they were very clever, the boys. They also didn't abandon their infrastructure. So they continued with it. So they went underground into. So the reason why I was asking Adesua is I wanted to ask, is there a possible correlation between what's happening with increasingly violent crime in Nigeria and what you have been telling us that, Obasanjo has been, dismantled, not has been, he dismantled the security establishment. And that actually what we see in their failure to manage Boko Haram is a symptom of much bigger failures to manage, even things like crime and so on. I don't know. I'm just
I
speculating.
I think this will tie into our conversation today because we're going to talk about democracies and weak institutions.
Yeah,
Sure, go
yeah,
on.
yeah.
So, because when we're thinking about, because I don't necessarily want to put this on Obasanjo, because honestly, Obasanjo left power nearly 20 years ago. It's been
Mm,
2 decades of mismanagement and lack of vision and lack of intentionality. Now, we
mm,
can say that yes, the fight for Boko Haram, we look at the dismantling of the military, and we can say our military has not been effective in fighting Boko Haram. But
mm,
your military is technically for external security.
mm,
It's police that is for internal security.
mm,
And in that case, what has happened to our police? Under Obasanjo, under Yaradua, under Jonathan, under Tinubu, under Buhari, they have not built our police. They have not, they don't have proper training. They don't have proper structures. We don't even have enough police to begin with.
mm.
I read a story last week, and I'll tell you guys a story. I know you laugh, but in
Yeah.
Zamfara State, Zamfara State, bandits went. We call them bandits. But honestly, these are
Yeah.
terrorists or criminals. They went to kidnap a two sitting counselors and a cleric. They went to kidnap them from a tea shop that was right opposite the police station. And so they first went to the police officers and seized their phones. They
And did what?
seized the phone. They seized their phones. They first robbed the police before they went to kidnap the people they wanted to kidnap.
They
What
first
is
robbed
it?
the police.
They first seized their phones. They seized their phones, and they said that there was not much of a pushback from the police. They went to the police and they seized their phones. And then they went to go and kidnap the people they wanted to kidnap. What does that mean if your police can be disarmed? Not even that they're stealing phones from your police officers, that they're kidnapping people opposite of police stations, right? Our police are not fit for purpose.
But
And
who
On
are
so
that
these? Who
note,
are these?
let us talk the big Africa picture. Let's talk the big Africa
Okay.
picture.
let's take Africa, right? Because
Yeah,
we need
Yes.
to talk about we're going to talk about
yeah.
democracy. We're like 15 minutes in now. Let's talk about democracy. Let's talk about weakening institutions. Because as I say, and I want to first start with Charles because Bob and I have been going back and forth for a minute. We've been talking about because we're talking about democracy and weak institutions and why autocrats can sometimes come into power. Sorry, why opposition candidates can sometimes come
Mm,
into
mm,
power
mm,
after
mm.
removing autocrats and become autocratic themselves. And I wanted to talk about this in the African context, but I also want to talk about it in the context of Donald Trump because America always appeared as the bastion of strong institutions and the checks and balances. And now we're seeing the National Guard on the streets of Chicago. So, Charles, how do you feel about this idea of strong institutions versus strong men in this democracy battle?
There is that article in the Journal of Democracy, which actually I think initially started off our conversation when where this and it's actually depressing. It it studied 40 elections since 1990 in Africa, in which the Democrats came to power,
Mm.
promising a new dawn and all of that kind of thing. And they kicked out the dictators and found that virtually all of them eventually became autocrats. And I think the argument they make is that that there tends to be too many incentives for people to turn, autocratic, and that the elite networks feed them, the patronage feeds them, and that the dynamics that push people towards authoritarian tendencies tend to be much much stronger, and that's where the Donald Trump thing came. You see the same pattern in Donald Trump, because just the network, the very anti-illiberal, the anti LGBT, tendencies, these very anti-immigrant tendencies, they have coalesced and they have created a huge wave, and that inevitably, if they have created a wave and a strong incentive for the guy to become an autocrat. So it is, this idea that the democratic forces or the incentives for a more conventional liberal democracy have become fairly weak in this age.
Bob, I really like to bring you in here because I've been seeing Trump 2028 hats, I believe it is. He put it on his desk in the Oval Office. This idea that he wants to run again, and it's something that's been discussed. But I also want to ask you because as a you're in Kampala now. I think you've
Yes.
had maybe two leaders in the last 50 years or how many. when did
Please,
when did
please
the
don't, please don't depress me. Let's go on. Uh,
but you know what it is, in
actually,
your
no. Actually, that's not correct.
yeah.
We've had in the last 40 years, we've had about four different iterations of the same leader. But that means so so in so
You see the
so
freedom fighter come in and the freedom fighter becomes the strong man. Why?
no. It actually wasn't from freedom fighter to strongman. No, it was actually first strongman,
Hmm.
then strongman stroke freedom fighter. Then he became president and was leftist and progressive, and then he switched and became a liberal democrat and free market reformist, modernist modernizer, and then he became populist, in the sense that he tried to do popular politics. And
Hmm.
then when that ran its mile, now we're in a different territory. We're even in semi-retirement. But I don't want to go too far into the iterations. But I'm telling you that, so technically we haven't had the same leader for the last 50 years. The only leader, the only person I know who was consistent in his leadership for 50 years was Fidel Castro. He's the only one who was, he never changed until he died. So, but back to the point that you are raising. For me, the more important issue is that in Africa today, the debate we need to start having is separating elections from democracy. They are now two totally different issues. There is the process of electing leaders that goes on in Africa as the path to which people arrive in office or stay there forever.
Hmm.
That path is not necessarily democratic anymore.
Hmm.
It has become what Charles was describing as certain elites capturing the pathways to power and wanting to guarantee, first of all, to determine the outcome well in advance and guarantee their other interests. And you see that debate right across. So even supposedly progressive and revolutionary organizations like the African National Congress, they have an enthronement process, a coronation. So, once you become vice president, it is automatic that you will be president. Whether you are competent to be president or not doesn't matter, because the fact that you're vice president or deputy president doesn't mean you're competent to be president. And the
Mm.
circumstances that bring you in as number two could be different. But you've been talking about Trump and all of these things. I want to also ask to remind our audiences that Hitler actually arrived in office by popular vote.
Mm.
So did Mussolini. These people didn't come to office by force, they actually had support. And one of the things that because we are so blinded by our own liberal lenses, we fail to appreciate that actually Trump is very popular with the people who elect him. The fact
Of
that
course.
whether he's right or wrong, he is hugely popular with those who elect him. So I think the question that we need to look at critically is whether elections now or as a process of intermediating political tensions is still a democratic process and can be a democratic process.
I think that's a very important question to ask ourselves. If we talk about Trump, Elon Musk, just one man donated over $270 million to Donald Trump.
Mhm.
Can we have election process anywhere in the world when we have the ultra wealthy? The three rich, if the three richest men in Nigeria decide that they are going to back a candidate, can anybody, can the 200 million people come against three men? Probably not. With the funds that they have, they're richer than the whole 60% of the country does not have as much money as Dangote, just one man. So in an environment where we have this such huge consolidation of wealth in the hands of a few, we are seeing it all over the world. Elon Musk entering England, right? And we see now both the conservatives and the liberals, if they hold elections today, are out. These are two staunch parties that have been there since the beginning of of time in England, right?
Mm.
And now we're seeing that with the entrance of money and the international money also, that even they are feeling what they have put upon the African continent for so long. They're seeing outside money coming to tell them who will be the leader,
Yes.
and they're having to deal with that. But I also want us to bring it back home, because in 4 days, even if we're not thinking about money, what do we determine as a fair election? Paul Biya has been in power since 1982. In 4 days, he's likely to be re-elected as Cameroon's president.
His daughter has refused to vote for him.
He's,
Yeah,
yes, but
but yeah,
he's the black sheep of the family, right? But is
Yeah.
is there a way? Is there, even when you don't have outside money, if you have people like a Paul Biya running in Cameroon, who is likely to win even with people voting at 92? Then
mm.
how is our election process even valid? Charles,
And
we're
it's
going
it's
to.
and really it is sad because one as a result of that, because I think a lot of people now understand that the voice, that their voices don't matter. So you are beginning to see, it's in the early stage, but I think that's where we are seeing a lot of radicalization, and that I think increasingly people don't believe that a ballot, their ballots count. So we are
Mm,
seeing forces which I think potentially in a few years could endanger these, a lot of our states. And the the downside of this is what the impact of social media has been, because previously when people were not organized around these digital platforms, the campaigning structure made it possible that you needed to go and message, and you make promises in different areas and all those things. But I think that
mhm,
digital media now has made it possible for a certain level of detachment, a certain level of detachment, but then very, very effective mobilization. So you have this greater gulf between how victory is delivered and the programmatic promises of the constituencies, the programmatic demands of the constituencies that leaders are campaigning in. So it's really going to be. We've gone down, I think, probably a very dark hole right now. And
Uh,
beer, and that's why beer can afford, like you saw, he is. They created these effigies of him and his wife, so he doesn't have
That
to. He
is
doesn't.
that real? I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
refused to believe that
yes.
that is real. I have
So
told
so
myself it
you know,
has to be a
yeah, because I think he went to Europe. He hasn't been
mm.
seen on the campaign trail. He went to Europe last week, so they just carry his effigy and put it on the pulpit, and a spokesman
you,
points to it, I guess, and says, "As my leader here is saying," and
I honestly don't want us to lose sight of something that's happening in Cameroon that's very instructive. And I got to understand it during the Africa Cup, the time when the CAF was going on. There is a political elite in Cameroon that has coalesced around the presidential guard, and I think there's a very senior a couple of senior army officers in the presidential guard who are the actual political powers. But just like Algeria, they they don't think it's time or there's a need to step out and be responsible. And in part because I think they don't want a contestation. So what they all agree on is to keep the Paul Biya circus going, because you have to explain to me the CAF was very well organized. That particular Africa Cup of Nations was very well organized. Stadia were functional. Who were the people who made that work? If it wasn't government, how does this government function when Bia is perpetually in a hospital in Geneva? So there is a group that functions. What is missing is, I think they've sort of reached a consensus that no one person can step out until this guy has actually died. And then so they've been postponing the hour of reckoning. Now, what happened in Algeria is that they kept the leadership that had been in FLN. So they would
Bouteflika.
succeed each other. Yeah, Bouteflika, Charlie Benjedid. These are all guys who had been with Ben Bella in the war against the French, until who was the last one who was wheeled out in a wheelchair to
Yeah,
stand
that
for
is
election. And
Bouteflika. Yeah, yeah,
Bouteflika, he was the last.
yeah.
But even the general who eventually made the decision to get rid of him had been a young officer, very young in that war. So you've got these cultures and these histories that play into the establishment. And I begin to think that the Cameroon political elite actually are invested in keeping this caricature running, because it
yes.
shields them from the accountability that they need to carry out. But I wanted to tell you a story, Adesua, because you've given the example of Elon Musk. That's at the high level. Let me give
Mm,
you at a small low level here in Uganda. So Uganda has this arrangement in its parliament where they have affirmative action seats. So you've got workers, youth, the military is also there. But the initial one, which was really radical and was applauded, was that every district had to have a woman representative elected under universal suffrage. It worked very well until the male establishment figured out how to sabotage it. So, do you know what they did? So, in a district, the male establishment would sit because they were in charge of the political networks, and they would start horse trading. So, they would say, okay, Charles wants to go to parliament. Okay, we'll let Charles go. But Adesua's husband will stand down for Charles. But Adesua should go as the woman MP. for the district.
Mhm.
So that's a good trade-off. But the
You
but
know,
but the but there was another catch. They also defined who an ideal woman MP should be. So it was
hmm
always the headmistress type, the church.
you
The
know, we hit you have hit something on the head because this is a conversation from Nigeria, and I've been questioning whether I should report on this, but I must. Right
yeah,
now, they're pushing for affirmative action seats for women. They want
yeah.
to. It's a constitutional amendment. It's a hot topic issue, and the
Mhm.
politicians and the political leaders and the men are like, "I'm a he for she. We're for this. We're for this." And a woman legislator pulled me aside, and she said it's not politically expedient for me to come out against this. But
Mhm.
this thing is dangerous. They are looking for girlfriends and for the retired women who, they're looking for who they consider to be good women. And yesterday I
Exactly.
was interviewing, I was speaking to a legislator, and he said the women have realized that it's best to massage our egos. That's how they'll get their seats. I said,
Wow.
I said, what do you mean? I said, do you mean they're massaging your egos? He said, yes, before they were fighting, they were agitating, they were protesting, but now they've learned to massage our egos. He said this on camera.
Wow.
And when he said this to me, I was like, wow. You and the thing is, when we look at, and I no offense, because I'm not saying that these women are not qualified, even though some of them are not. If you look at the women ministers in Tinubu's cabinet, they can all pass the paper bag test. They're
Mhm.
all light skinned. This is a very significant
let,
thing. It's a
let's
very
not
important.
go there. It's a very
No,
sensitive issue
no,
in
no.
the Ugandan parliament. So
It's a very sensitive issue here too. We talk about these things without talking about it, and I don't understand why. There were rumors that this person dated this person is this person's wife, this person is this person's daughter. If you look at the women legislators now, we were just celebrating yesterday in Benadia. She's a young woman who has come into the parliament. She's not that young, she's in her 40s, but her brother was governor. Her father is the Esama of the Benin Kingdom. If you look at the SGF's wife is in there, ex-governors' daughters are in there. It is very rare to find a woman in our legislative body, in our National Assembly, who is not attached to a man,
no, you see,
who is not
initially,
attached,
you,
even now.
you see
and
at
and
this
this is
one.
before we even put affirmative action. So these structural problems that we're talking about, weak institutions, weak but also strong men who are weak. How do we Charles, how do we
No.
move forward if we're on if I no, I must ask you, as men, how is it possible to move forward if half your population is oppressed, properly oppressed? Your youth have futures that are seemingly shrinking by the year.
Yeah.
How is it possible that these systems or this political elite, how do they maintain themselves? Like, what do we see happening in the next 10 years?
Uh, unfortunately, I think where we have reached, we have, and in in some of the countries that have made progress. I mean, Rwanda is one of them. Ethiopia, some of these places, initially Mozambique, and it seems that we need a crisis because there was this sense that we could reform, because there was a lot of
Mm.
language, free media, civil society, this kind of thing, write new constitutions, but obviously those have not worked. But you kind of see that the only time we seem to buy some 10 or 12 years to 15 years of reform is if the whole system is broken, and often violently.
Mm,
And you
Mm.
kind of, all the vested interests are scattered. They run away, they get disorganized. Then you have some room to do reforms for about 5, 5, 10, 12 years. before they
mm,
regroup. And, because you see that even in Kenya after 2002, when
mm,
Moi was defeated and an
mm,
old order, it just took the old order about 3 years to regroup and
mm,
and and recapture the state again. So I think that
mm.
short of such a dramatic rupture like that, we are really doomed to be caught in this rut for a long time.
Well,
We are doomed.
yes. No, Adesua, the one in Uganda actually, that was the outcome of a very progressive movement by the women. And the women's movement constituted very progressive people. But I think the problem became once we went into popular elections and
Mm,
the transactional politics entered, and so horse trading, because the initial representatives of women in the affirmative action were really, really good people. I mean, very competent politicians, very intelligent, and they would stand up on their own in a male dominated parliament. And up to today, some of them are still the leading personalities of the women political elite. Of course, some districts used to struggle because they were small new districts, and probably the most senior person was the high school teacher, who was also the wife of the head of the laity in the church or the lay canon. The kinds of things that where depth is missing. So that's that. But I also don't want us to despair too much. Why? Because people who undermine systems don't
mm,
realize that they are undermining themselves. Now,
mm,
I will give an example of which I think it's time for us to revisit this example. You see, if Hitler had maintained the initial approach with the military in the first 2 years of the World War, he would actually have ended up as a military victor. It is because later on he begins to think he's such a great genius, starts to disregard the actual military geniuses because he was now feeling as the Fuhrer, he knew exactly what to do. Which is why he sends them off on a misadventure in Russia, sends them off on a misadventure in North Africa. And my point is, even the so-called strongmen who may appear in the moment to be doing things that they can do because of their sheer strength, they miss out on number one, the collective value of institutions helping them. They forget
mm,
that they arrived in the office that they're in through an institutional process, not their own strength. So they begin to dismantle some of the very things that brought them into office. Good example, Trump falls out with Elon Musk and forgets that Elon is the one who brought him. But Elon
mm,
represents a certain movement. Trump just happens to be at the head of that movement, but doesn't mean it belongs to him. So even in Africa, the leaders who have dismantled systems, the best example for me is one particular situation that Charles observed very, very closely, which was the presidency of Arap Moi in Kenya and how it came to an end. Or another good example is Babangida when he was military leader. The most famous story is that he finally dribbled himself. The man boarded a plane and went into exile as a sitting president. He left and went to Germany. But
See,
Charles,
I I have
But
a
how
very
but
did
different
but but Bob, it raises the question, and that's what I do. So where does this end? You see, because we have had the
what?
initial runway,
Mhm.
uh,
mm.
all these things, how do they end?
I, I
And,
I
and and my
Wait,
believe.
view is that they end badly.
I
Okay,
want to
yeah,
say something, Bob. Um, Babangida's era is not really over. Babangida made more billionaires than anybody in Nigeria's history. He killed more military men than anybody,
yeah,
including his own friends.
yes.
Abacha is the big bag boogeyman, but if you look at the numbers of who Abiy just
But
impressive. When he did his book launch, when he did his book launch, and people were seeing titans of industry and da da da, and everybody came to stage and said, "Babangida made me." I think a lot of people under the age of 30 were shaking in their boots because there was a lack of comprehension for the class that Babangida made. The class he made is still the class that's on top of society, and
no,
they all pay homage to him. I understand what you're saying, that he played himself,
but
but there's this.
in killing, you forgot to kill the one most important person. You forgot to kill Abacha.
Culture was not so important, you know. It's
But Abacha
hindsight that makes
is the one who drove him
it.
out.
I know, but it's
So
hindsight that makes Abacha important, right? Even when they were in military school with Abdusalami and Abacha. I remember I spoke to Abdusalami, right? He said in training that Abacha was technically even too short to join them, so they used to even try and help him, push him over some of the barricades. And he was this small short boy, right? But IBB and Abdusalami, they were brothers. They grew up. They knew Abacha. They used to play football tournaments against each other. Abdusalami spoke to me about this. So it's in hindsight that that small kid that you guys were helping over the barricade is now the big man. It's hindsight is 2020, but Abacha was not the one to kill back
he
then.
hated them.
It's who he becomes, it's hindsight. But I want to say something because we're talking about people destroying the institutions that put them in power. And it's a tale as old as time, is that you get to the top and you try and pull up the ladder, right?
Mhm,
But then you're
mhm,
gonna get stuck one day and you're gonna wish you had
Yeah.
a ladder to take
Yeah.
you somewhere. When we're saying it, how do we go forward? And we're
mhm.
thinking about institutional building. I want to bring it now to, because I'm seeing something happening in Nigeria that's very similar to what is happening in America, right? In America right now, the Senate Republicans are trying to not get rid of the filibuster because they because there is a sense, right, that we might be the big dogs now, but we might not be the big dogs forever. You have guys who are not, they're not pushing back against Trump, but they are also like in a place where they'll push his nominations through in ways that have not been done before. But they're like, let's not completely destroy the institution itself,
Mhm,
because the institution itself protects us.
mhm.
And I don't see that thinking a lot on the continent. And I'm bringing it now to Nigeria, right? Because Senator Natasha is now back in the Senate.
Oh wow.
Mm.
As of yesterday, she's back in the Senate, and there had to be a come to Jesus moment there, of like, after she has served her suspension and you're now trying to prevent her from coming back, there had to be a thinking of, come, come, come. That's too far.
Mm,
You get to a point where if you destroy the institution to this level, you
Yeah.
are removing guards that protect us.
yes.
And so I think that is the question, is that why even this thinking, this idea that the institution itself, even if it's protecting our bad behavior, we can't completely destroy the institution. And so I think, like, when we're talking about weak institutions, I do think that there is a gamble that leaders make, is that how weak can I make it without breaking it completely?
But you see, the problem is that is not measurable. You can't know
It is not.
when. Yeah, you can't know at what point it breaks. But also, I feel that they get high on their infallibility, and there
Mm.
is a sense in which they feel that. I mean, like in our case, the guys have no concept of anything that can go wrong. They've been here 40 years. 40. Their grandchildren are now getting married on state money. So how can this not be an aristocracy? How can this not be a monarchy? Because they have no concept of change happening. And because they are always removed from the process of the change happening, or the beginnings of change, they don't see it until the change is actually sweeping them. That's when they realize, oh my God, this thing is so bad. I mean, Gaddafi didn't believe he was hated until the young man drove a stick through his behind. That's when he realized how badly hated he was. He couldn't understand this. He had no concept of the fact that he can be hated. And so
Mm.
the problem of dismantling these things is that you don't get you see the Americans, you may say what you may say now about Trump, but they're beginning to realize that we could get to a place where we become hostages. So that's why you may get big, and because they come from diverse backgrounds, they're able to create an objectivity. Here, if you are engaging in the politics, I mean, where there is just praise singing, you have an effigy, then there is no mechanism by which people can talk back. In a no, and that's why us guys on the bad natives are here. I've met people who follow and listen to us, and they are asking a very simple question: how come we don't have this quality of conversation and engagement in the mainstream places where debate happens, even at universities? That's the question that people are asking me. And I say I can understand it because we've been exiled to these platforms. We no longer have. I was telling Charles there was a show that we both used to be on, and now some corrupt chap here who stole money from government paid them to go to his home and do a show on his reputation. You imagine taking a rise to Tinubu's son's home and interviewing him in his sitting room. Can you imagine that? I want you to tell me that the show is
Can.
anchored.
I can. I'm telling you, I can. Do you know what's going on in Nigeria these days? Oh, of course I can. I can. In fact, and I will. The difference is, oh no, no. The difference is, you know what? My one of my coworkers yesterday got into it with a minister, and the minister said to him, "Who are you? Keep quiet." On air, on his show,
Wow.
and the lawmaker came up to tell me, "How can your co-anchor? I mean, how can he do that?" I said, "He's on his show." They're like, "He's a minister." I said, "He's on his show. You are in my studio. Excuse me. You tell me to be quiet." I'm like, I think there is no concept. People actually do not understand the concept. I said, the president of Nigeria cannot tell me to keep quiet on my
but
show. You
but you
cannot.
see, Adesua, if the bastion of democracy, the United States of America, the president can get comedians in the late night show fired,
Mm.
that tells you where the world is heading. That actually maybe a certain
You
era
can.
is ending.
But you know what? It's never ending. We always have this push and pulls. And the
Yeah,
person who reminded me of this is Ta-Nehisi Coates, who
really.
he wrote Between the World and Me. He is
Mm,
very brilliant, very, very brilliant writer. But he was talking about the Reconstruction era and the pushback in America. And people forget that there was a time where Black people were entering the legislature, where they had, the economic standing then was better than it is today. You had Black households and Black middle class that was growing in the Reconstruction era, and then
mm,
the pushback to that is essentially the civil war that comes after, or the revolution. What comes after? I'm mixing these two up because I think they should be named different things. But what you have in life is that you have a push and you have a pull. You cannot have a Trump without an Obama.
and
Obama
and
made
and
a
and
white
and, and, and,
psychosis.
and now Imam Dani.
And now Imam Dani. You could not have had Imam Dani saying I'm a democratic socialist in 2008. In 2008, Obama was not even pro gay marriage, right? You
Yeah.
have such a people forget, and I think that's that pendulum that swings. It
Hmm.
swings both ways because the pushback to a Trump is going to be different than people imagine. A country singer
Mm.
just released an anti-ICE
Yeah.
song,
Hmm.
right? Taylor Swift is dealing with pushback from her fans because they think she is now just going against, this liberal women idea. And you see a lot of white women coming out against Taylor Swift. There's a lot that is going to happen culturally across the world. And at the same, because, but it's not anytime soon, I don't think. And if you look at Asia, If you look at Japan going even more right wing now, you know, if you look at some of the changes that we're seeing, if you look at Madagascar, if you look at Morocco, like if you see this, there is a significant cultural shift that is going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And what is the only thing that I can imagine is that I don't know what will make the levees break, but they are going to break. And I think we're going to look back on this era, and we're particularly going to look back on Trump. We're particularly going to look back at what is going on in Gaza, and we're going to understand that this is going to change everything that comes after it. When I look at Israel and Gaza, I look at it not just as a crisis, but I look at it as it's changing the mentality of a lot of people, of what they think is possible. I don't think the world goes back to normal after that. I think the pendulum
No.
is going to swing, but I don't know what will make the levees break.
And I think the right
Well,
wingers are not prepared. What will make the levees break? The demographics are going to change. The kids are coming to town, whether you like it or
but
not.
but but some of these kids are fairly reactionary, eh?
That's okay, but
Particularly
they are
the
coming.
men.
But they are coming to town. So wait for them. Man, I think we can do the final.
We can do our
Can I
parting
start?
shots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
well, I've been working on a project that finally comes alive tomorrow. So,
Oh,
Mm.
yes, for almost about 10 months, I have been trying to put together a marathon that's in the center of Uganda because we didn't have one of those, after there was a one that was hugely popular with one of our telecom companies that has since gone, it was shut down. There is another one which is just a run, but it is hugely popular and it's linked to the traditional leader of this area. But we haven't had a properly organized runners marathon in the center of the country, So we're going to be running from Kampala, the capital city, to Entebbe, which is
Oh
the
wow.
which is the original. And then when we get there, we will have just a jamboree of these runners who believe that they're the only people in this country with the right to drink a beer in the morning. So, at 9 a.m., these guys,
you are you managed to find a distance of 42 kilometers.
yes, and it is
Oh.
so straightforward that you don't need to go through residences and blocked roads. So it's
Mm.
just so if it works as a route, then we can go and pitch it to bigger companies and then start to build on it and hope to turn it into a big event. So pray for me, guys. I need to get this right.
Congratulations. I'm very
Yeah.
excited for you. That's
Thank-
huge. That
I'll
is
you know
huge.
I'll come and sell water on the roadside.
No, do you know, Charles? Do you know what has become the popular hydration drink? It is a local juice made out of sugarcane and ginger and something called mundiai wite or something like that. It's a ginseng root. It is supposed to be an aphrodisiac, but guys gulp it down and they get energies that you can't understand. So it's crazy stuff. It's worse than Red Bull. So, do you know how many
Anyway,
I'm
liters we've bought
now I
empty
am
liters of that to give guys on the road? You can't talk of hydration without it. Go on, guys.
so let me go next because I know Charles will have
no,
a banger for us.
okay,
You want to I know you have a banger for us. I
no.
actually I have two. I have to
Yeah.
give two sides of a coin. Um Nigeria's Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation just resigned. Why did he resign? Because an article came out saying that he had forged not only his university degree, but also his NYSC certificate. That's the service year everyone has to do before they can be employed. He had forged a degree. The university said, don't recognize that degree. He had also forged his service year certificates. He never served, you know, and
That's that
he has
that's
been
very that's very innovative, isn't it?
No,
Youth
listen,
Minister for Innovation.
most people did not know his name until this scandal because he was useless as a minister.
Yeah.
I ran into him. I ran into him in New York for the UN General Assembly. Did not recognize him.
Wow.
Did not, and he also seemed like he was there for a jamboree, a bonanza. But that's one side of the coin because he's resigned, he's out. He said it was blackmail, and I was like, sir, it's accountability. It's not blackmail. You defrauded the country. It's not blackmail to come out and let the country know. But the second one is a positive story. E1 Lagos held. That is like the Formula One, but for electric on the boats that do the races on water. And it's the first time it's come to Africa. It was held in Lagos last weekend. They organized it much better than I would have thought they would do. They really tried. They had
The
free
government
tickets
wasn't
for people.
involved.
The Lagos state government was
Wow.
Oh yeah, okay.
spearheaded by the governor, the commissioner for tourism, Toke Benson, and their team. So E1 Lagos team, and then and they had funding from Afrexim Bank. I think is one of the last things Benedict Orama did before he left Afrexim Bank, because they also had a little party for him. They're celebrating his tenure, but it was beautifully done. It was beautifully done. And Lagos is a coastal city. We're trying to push renewable energy, electricity, green energy. So also having the electric race was, I think, tied into this idea of where Lagos is trying to position itself as. And I think, as it being the first time it's been done in Africa, as it being done successfully, and also it was a Brazilian team that won. And we have a very strong tie with Brazil here in Nigeria,
Yeah,
and
Yoruba, I
particularly
see
in
that.
Lagos. Yeah,
Yeah,
we also have it
yeah.
because we also have a Brazilian quarter in Lagos with the returnees that came back from Brazil, like the Cardosos and stuff. So it was actually very beautiful, actually, and it just felt very symbolic to
Wow.
also have a Brazilian team be the one that won. So I think that would be my parting shot. Sometimes we're having good things come
Yeah,
out.
but
No.
doesn't Drogba actually own a team?
Yeah, I think he was
Yeah, he
around
does.
Didier
He
Drogba.
does.
He was
Yeah,
around, yes. Yes, he came also. He was one of the
yeah.
celebrities
I know the
that was there.
Drogba, Will Smith, all those guys own teams. That okay? That's great. No, mine actually is not the usual, but it touches a little bit on what Bob just said. In you know in Zimbabwe, the government just put out circular, and
Mhm.
they are saying it's about running, and they are saying
Mhm.
that whether whether you're organizing an official or a private or a fun run, you have to pay $2, no $7. So if if Fadeso and her girlfriends decide to go to her mother's farm and run there, you have to pay the government $7.
You need a
It is
license to run in Zimbabwe.
yeah, you can't just get out and run, but I think that the bigger thing is just shows you the crisis
Yeah.
of what we are seeing in these African states with this debt and the withdrawal of funding and all these kind of things, and we're going to go into a lot of crazy things. So wonderful people, remember, please follow this program if you love it, and subscribe, and follow us on our social media handles, and it's been wonderful to have you.
Ciao.